There's something I'd like to invite you to discern with me. I spoke with a new friend on the channel. His name is John, and he was bringing some things to my attention that I think were actually very important for us to be considering. We've done the best that we can with what we have. So we've looked at, for example, from new moon to new moon, we're told that that's one of God's months. And the best we have right now is that, NASA says that there's 29.5 days from new moon to new moon. I don't know what 0.5 days is, like how that would work out. It's been a puzzle to me, but we've done our best. I think that part of what we need to do, and I was talking with Tori about this today, is look up in the sky, just like Jews did. Look up in the sky before there was any technology and witness when the new moon is. We observed New Moon Festival 2 nights ago because that's what we see online. We're doing the best that we can right now. It's a time of deception. We're coming out of deception. And as we're doing that, we're doing the best that we can to follow God. Remember that He honors that. He honors it in people who are actively pursuing His heart, okay? Let's be clear. He doesn't honor it in people who justify themselves by that and just simply say, oh, well, He knows my heart, so it's okay to observe Christmas or whatever other nasty thing they're doing. We're actively pursuing His heart and reading His word. So we've understood that there's a 354-day calendar. That also, by the way, is what Muslims observe. They observe a lunar calendar. They haven't sold out to this Gregorian solar calendar. And so I very much respect that they do that. But here's the thing. They have a holy day called Ramadan. And Ramadan will end up in all different kinds of all different seasons. So there's this 11-day discrepancy. And we've known this. This is one of the things that we've talked about as a body, that there's an 11-day discrepancy between the Gregorian calendar and the calendar that we've been using, the lunar calendar. By the way, before I go any further, you're probably wondering, if you're in the assembly, well, does this affect the day that we discern? No, it does not. It does not affect the day that we discern. It's not going to impact that, so don't panic about that. The day of Pentecost and the calendar, this simply affects how many days are in a year. And in affecting how many days are in a year, it throws off our seasons, or seems to anyway. So from a 354-day calendar, there's an 11-day discrepancy versus a 360-day calendar, which I actually believe is correct in the Bible, and I'm going to show you why I believe that. But there are some things that right now are confusing because we haven't discerned them yet, okay? I want you to know that where there's a confliction or a seeming confliction in the Bible, you don't need to start panicking. You need to believe in the word that God has given you and believe in the God who says, if you ask for wisdom, I will reveal it to you. He has always done that with me. He's always come through, but you need to have patience and you need to have endurance. Don't go binge watching YouTube. Don't go listening to other people's authority. Believe in the word and believe in God. He will give you understanding. So I'm inviting you to discern this, but I'm not inviting you to send me videos. I'm not inviting you to speak on the authority of the world. I know that those who are in the assembly know this. You know this and you live by it. We're going to discern by His Spirit and His truth, and that's it. And why are we going to do that? Because John 4 says God desires worshipers who worship Him in the Spirit and in truth. That's how we worship Him. And that is the only authority that we need. We do not need any other authority, no extra books and no extra doctrines. So one of the points that John made to me is that if the calendar has that large of a discrepancy in the 11-day discrepancy, right, that you're going to end up really far behind in terms of God's seasons. And I understand that. And John, by the way, has told me that he's an old physics teacher. So I would imagine that for John, hearing what I'm talking about with the 354-day calendar and, that sort of thing, that he was probably like, yeah, but that just can't work, right? I mean, you can appreciate that. No, that can't work with the seasons. And it's important that it work with the seasons, actually. Why is it important? Because God has appointed times. In Leviticus 23, we talk about His appointed times: Passover, the festival of unleavened bread, the feast of first fruits, and the festival of weeks, and festival of tabernacles, and festival of trumpets. And in all of these, there's a specific offering that's being given. These appointed times are oriented around harvest seasons. And so you know the harvest seasons by when you're harvesting, when those things grow, right? And one thing that I have mentioned in other videos is let's do an experiment. Let's see if things grow a little bit earlier. And in fact, there are some articles that do indicate that the growing season has been a little bit earlier. And we talked about that with regard to certain flowers blooming earlier. Because there are certain crops that you can grow at various times of the year. In any event, in terms of wheat, in terms of barley, these things grow at a very specific time of year. And so if the calendar starts getting too off and the seasons start getting off, that's going to affect when we're observing, for example, the Passover on the 14th of Nisan, and then the Festival of Unleavened Bread. And then that following Sabbath, the day after the Sabbath, we're supposed to be waving the sheaf of the grain offering, which I have come to understand is actually barley. At that point, it would be barley that's being harvested. And the reason we know that it can't be wheat is because we know from Exodus 34, in verse 22, the word says, you shall observe the festival of weeks, the first fruits of the wheat harvest. Okay, depending on how you're looking at this, you could read that and think that the first fruits of the wheat harvest is separate. But actually, it's the Feast of Weeks, all caps, and then comma, the first fruits of the wheat harvest. So it's saying these are the same thing. Okay, that's in the NIV version. In other versions, it makes it super clear, the Festival of Weeks, which is the first fruits of the wheat harvest. Okay, so if we're looking at the Festival of First Fruits, in Leviticus 23, it actually refers to it as the offering of first fruits. And all it simply says is, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before the Lord, so it'll be accepted on your behalf. All right. And then 50 days from that Sabbath, or from the day after the Sabbath, from the time that you waved that sheaf of the wave offering, you count off 7 full weeks, 50 days. And then is the festival of Pentecost, or the Festival of Weeks. They're the same thing. You can't have 50 days between the first fruits of wheat and then in another 50 days you're harvesting the first fruits of wheat, because the first fruits are the first of the harvest. You can't have that big of a discrepancy between your harvest of that wheat. So the offering of first fruits has to be referring to barley or some other grain. It doesn't really matter. But barley is actually harvested before the wheat. Why does this matter? Because the time of year that these things are growing and being harvested for the first time, like the first fruits are coming up, it's important, isn't it? So one of the things that we discerned was that in 2022, in the middle of May, that we discerned the date of Pentecost. And we discerned it in part based on my personal experience of having been anointed during that time. That was my personal testimony. It does not mean that you just take my testimony and go, oh, guess it's true. You have to go back to God and ask him. And then he's going to reveal to you what he wants to reveal to you. But that was my personal testimony. And we all came together, and each one God revealed in a specific way to them. And then we came together and talked about it, and it was amazing. Well, the time to harvest wheat is towards the end of May. That's where the final harvest of the wheat is coming from. If that's a first fruit, then it could very well happen in mid-May. If we change around, you have to go based on the new moon. So if we change around, it's too early or it's too late for that harvest. So that date that we discerned is absolutely true based on the harvest season. So I don't want anyone to panic about that. We discerned it. God testified to it. We reserve room to be corrected because the only thing that matters is truth. But I'm telling you right now, it adds up. Now, here's the other thing that I want to talk with you about in terms of the year. And this doesn't change what we discerned again. In terms of the year, I had recently been praying because I understood that that the birthday that I calculated on God's calendar was last Saturday, November 12th. It correlated to November 12th and is actually Adar 29. And I asked God if he would confirm for me either way. Is this true or is it not? And I did not feel him on my birthday, or what I thought was my birthday. And I was I said something to Tori because I'm already going through some other things, and it was a little upsetting for me to not hear from him. And it's not that I wasn't hearing from him. I just didn't feel the confirmation. So I wasn't hearing from him in that way. But now remember, I don't stop. I don't stop bugging God. Like I don't stop, not bugging him, but you know what I'm saying. I don't stop taking things up with him just because he's not responding to me. Then I say to him, you haven't answered my question. And I know that you're going to answer my question. I know that you give me two witnesses either way as to whether something is true or it's not. And John called me somewhere in all of this and wanted to have this conversation about the calendar. Do you think that might be an answer to prayer? So as John and I were talking on the phone, we were talking about these different things that just are not totally adding up. And I agreed with him that the seasons and also there's something else that I'm still trying to understand, which is why is it that the first part of the 7-year period, the 1,260 days, is referred to as a time times and half a time. And then there's a latter part of the 7-year period that's referred to as 1,335 days, which is also referred to as a time times and half a time. That's weird. After that, all these things will be accomplished. 1,335 days, that just is, and this is in Daniel 12, by the way, feel free to look it up. So that part I'm still discerning as well. Please discern it with us. Why does he use that language? But here's the thing. He kept drawing my attention to 1,260 days. And if you divide 1,260 by 3.5, 3.5 years, you're going to get 360-day years. Well, that wasn't enough for me because of the reasons I just mentioned. Because he also refers to the 1,335 days as a time times and half a time. But in Genesis 7, verse 11, it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, pay attention to this date, the second month on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. So on this date, the second month on the 17th day, this is when the flood started. And in verse 24, it says, and the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. Okay, 150 days. And then in Genesis 8, it says in verse 3, at the end of 150 days, the waters had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month. Okay, what day did we start with? We started with the second month on the 17th day. Now, at the very end, is the 7th month on the 17th day. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Well, we can all do basic math, right? From the second month to the 7th month is 5 months. And we have the same day, 17th day. And we know that during that 5 months consisted of 150 days. Well, 150 days divided by 5 months is 30 days. That's 30-day months. And then we also see that in 1 Samuel 20, verse 5, that David said to Jonathan, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at the meal, but let me go so that I may hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. So David knew when the new moon was. It's not like he was going, there was some range of like 29 to 31 days where he was saying, well, it might be tomorrow, but it might be the day after, and it might be the day after that. He wasn't saying that. It's like there's no technology, right, to be able to look and see, and redefine what new moon means. They just looked up in the sky, and if the moon wasn't there, then it was a new moon. And then John was saying to me on the phone that there can actually be a range of days, and I've kind of noticed this as well. And I think it's going to be important, and Tori was mentioning this, that we do what the Jews do. Look up in the sky and look to see, is there a new moon or not? And that we observe it just like we would if we were just witnessing it, ourselves. We're going to have to do that. We're going to have to track this as a body. But John was telling me there could be a range of days in which there's a new moon, and that there's a particular day that is thought, by the experts to be the new moon. But see, that to me does not necessarily matter because they wouldn't have had that technology, nor would they have those definitions. It would simply be the definition that God has set with regard to light. So the purpose of me bringing this up is that God is exact, he's specific, he's precise, and there was specificity in David's statement. Look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I'm going to dine with the king, but let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. He knew when the new moon was going to occur. And we don't actually have any instruction as far as what I've seen as to when we would observe that new moon. Would we like see it and then observe it on the second day? Would we do it on the first day? So, I mean, the assumption would be, if you know when the new moon is going to happen, that's when you would be observing the new moon, that there was predictability. I actually found something interesting as I was looking up that verse, and it's found in 1 Samuel 20, verse 27. So what I just said is we don't actually know what day. That just got clarified. Listen to this. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today?" So we know that the new moon festival was occurring on that first day of the new moon. How do we know that? Because it says, but the next day, the second day of the month. What's the first day of the month? It's the day of the new moon. So now this is the second day of the month, which could also still be a new moon in terms of looking up in the sky, but the new moon is considered that first day. That's when the month starts, when it very first is visible that there is a new moon. That I don't believe that that's quite what we've been observing, and I'll tell you something so weird. It's weird in a good way, okay? That God has been laying this on different hearts, and He laid it on my heart to pray for through the birthday situation. He laid it on John's heart to call me. And Tori, this is so weird because I was telling her, guess what? I think that there's actually 360 days in a year. And she said, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that you said that." I was thinking about that all night. And when I started talking to her, because we were texting about that, and she was saying, "I've been thinking about this and thinking about it. God keeps putting in my heart." And she said that she was even having a conversation with Ness, with her husband. I'm saying these names like you know who they are, but like my grandma does this. I guess that means I'm getting old, but everybody in the assembly knows these names. So Tori was having a conversation with Ness, and she said something about new moon, and he responded to her, "No, that was last night, because there was no moon last night." So you see how awesome God is? Like he weaves this picture together through his people. Okay, so we have our answer. It's the first day when the moon is not visible. Anyone wondering what a new moon is? It's like the exact opposite of a full moon. Full moon is when it's all lit up. New moon is when it's not. I wanted to mention one thing that John said to me is that some Jews would like maybe estimate this or mark this by the crescent moon. I don't know why they would do that, because the crescent moon comes after the new moon. And if you're measuring this by the crescent moon, then that means that you haven't obeyed God's command. So I don't know what that's all about. Maybe people were looking at the crescent moon just to I don't know, estimate based on that. I don't know why they would have been doing that, period. I don't see it in the Bible, though. So you know my rule. It doesn't matter if it's not in the Bible. God has accounted for everything. Everything we need to know is right here. All right, so we talked about the 360-day year. We talked about how God's seasons and the harvest seasons, they really have to line up. They have to line up. And the reason why is because He gives specific dates in which we're bringing the first sheaf of the wave offering. So it has to line up with those dates. You cannot have dates on God's calendar that are not aligned to His harvest seasons. So we got to figure this out. Like, we have to discern this, because if we were literally bringing these, like observing these holy days in the specific way that He's saying to observe them, like if we were offering certain things, then we would know that. We'd be like, what do you mean bring the first sheaf of the wave offering? It's not wheat season. So we got to figure this out. Okay, so another thing, so in the 360 days, I mean, that gives us a little bit more time, because now we've taken care of the 6-day discrepancy, right? From the 354 days, there was an 11-day discrepancy. So now, okay, we've got 6 days accounted for. The thing is if you have 5 days of that discrepancy between the Gregorian calendar and and God's actual calendar, you're going to keep going earlier and earlier on the Gregorian calendar. It's not a problem according to the Gregorian calendar, because the Gregorian calendar is nothing. But it is according to the seasons. That's the thing that we need to be concerned about. Like, how does this throw off the seasons? And as far as I can see, this is the thing that's tripping me up. As far as I can see, I know that there are 12 months in God's year. Only 12 months listed in the Bible. And they're based on new moon to new moon. And we're seeing that there's 30 days in a month, so 360 days in a year. That's going to cause us to go earlier and earlier according to the calendar that we used to, with the Gregorian calendar. Not a problem, like I mentioned, according to the Gregorian calendar, but does that mess up our harvest seasons? So from this perspective, it takes 6 years for you to end up in another month, or technically 7 years. Every 7 years, you're ending up in an earlier month on this 360-day calendar. So I'm going to continue to study this. I want you guys to discern it with me. I think it's important that we're discerning things as a body. For a long time, it was just me letting you know what God says to me and that sort of thing. But we need to be progressing as a church, and everyone needs to be discerning. And, the body has done an excellent job of doing that in assembly and coming back and talking about, okay, here's what God said to me. We did it recently with regard to not eating the blood of animals and where we were going to shop and, different experiences that people have. We have some people who work on farms. We have Mally who lives in Mexico, and she grew up with her mother. They process their own meat right there. And she shared with us that it wasn't something that was traumatic to her as a child because it was done. The animals were cared for, and it was done in a humane way, and everything was done right then and there immediately. It wasn't like the animal was sitting around or went into a horrible situation. And so it was really helpful for us to come together and process these things and be able to hear the different perspectives of the body and what God is building in the repertoire or revealing through the repertoire that he's built in each person. So it's such a blessing. So let's discern this together. If you have any questions, I hope that this was clear anyway and it wasn't too confusing. But the biggest thing that we're discerning right now, just for the sake of clarification, is there indeed 360 days, or are there more days that I'm not seeing in the Word? Right now, what I see is that there's 360 days in a year. We know 100% that what Reformed Judaism has done to the calendar is just absolutely disgusting. They've obliterated the calendar. There's no calendar. They've added calendars, added leap years, added days, removed days. I mean, it's just, there's no calendar left. And all of this they did in order to accommodate to the Gregorian calendar and make it match up with the world. What we're trying to do is return back to, okay, what did God establish so that we can understand what he's saying in his word? But those harvest seasons do indeed need to line up. I think I just realized something, guys. Maybe they don't need to line up. Let's look at Leviticus 23. I think this is the key right here. The festival of weeks is based on that offering of first fruits. It doesn't necessarily mean that we need to count from the day after the Passover. And that's how we've been doing it. But actually, the only oh my goodness, I can't believe this. I knew he was going to reveal it. I knew it. I'm so excited right now. Okay, I know I got to get you caught up here with what it is that I'm realizing. Okay, the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread. I'm just going to go through and read it, and I'm going to show you why this is not something that necessarily needs to totally line up. Okay, there's only we can still make it line up. These are the Lord's appointed festivals, the sacred assemblies. You are to proclaim at their appointed times. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. On the 15th day of that month, the Lord's festival of unleavened bread begins. For 7 days you must eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. For 7 days, present a food offering to the Lord. And on the seventh day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. Do you see anything about first fruits there? Like, are you harvesting anything? No, you're not harvesting anything. You're using grain that you already have, so don't worry about that. Offering of first fruits, verse 9. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you and reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. So this is not based on a date, and it's also not based on necessarily counting down from the Sabbath after the Passover, which is what all of us have been taught. We've all been taught that. And that's what we've been doing. It is what we've been doing, but that isn't actually what the instructions say. The instructions say, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you and reap its harvest, Bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before the Lord, so it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day you wave the sheaf, you must sacrifice a burnt offering to the Lord, a lamb a year old without defect, together with its grain offering of 2/10 of an ephah of the finest flour mixed with olive oil, a food offering presented to the Lord, a pleasing aroma, and its drink offering of 1/4 of a hin of wine. You must not eat any bread or roasted or new grain until the very day you bring this offering to your God. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come wherever you live. So this is not in reference to the Passover. It's in reference to what? When you enter the land I'm going to give you and you reap its harvest. And indeed, it went along with the barley harvest. It would have to go along with the barley harvest because the barley harvest comes before the wheat harvest. And now you're going to see in the Festival of Weeks, from the day after the Sabbath to the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, count off 7 full weeks. So the Festival of Weeks is in relation to the offering of the first fruits. So this is contingent on what? It's contingent on when he brings you into the land he's going to give you and you reap its harvest. Now, we're not doing this anymore, obviously, so we could understand that this was happening during the time of the barley harvest. But Pentecost or Festival of Weeks or offering of first fruits, they are not on a specific day. They don't land on a specific day. And what I mean by that, it's not like they land on, Sivan 9 every year or something like that. And that's it. Those are the only two festivals, or the offering of first fruits technically is not necessarily a festival, but these are the only two events that actually go along with a specific harvest time. My head is blown. It's like that exploding brain emoji right now. This is so crazy. All right. Well, I love this because today when I spoke with John on the phone, because we've been talking with each other every time that we discover something, then we call and talk about it. And then we try to sort through, okay, what's the next thing? And today what he told me is, I looked and looked to see how first fruits is related to Passover, and it's not. Because originally he was really convinced that first fruits had to be related to Passover, and he was really kind of blown away that, my goodness, we've been taught this thing, and they're not even related. I couldn't find it anywhere. Oh, just wait till I call him. I'm so excited. Okay, did you guys follow that? Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you followed that. Is it clear? As far as we're concerned, as far as we're concerned, we probably should understand when barley is being harvested and try to line that up, right? We should probably try to line that up. But as far as everything else, as far as every other holy day, it does not have to line up. And maybe the original one did with spring, but the most important thing that we're doing is observing according to what we know within the Bible. So if that ends up falling, I don't care what month it falls in. According to the Gregorian calendar, the only thing that matters is that I'm observing what God has set. And it's very clear that from new moon to new moon, there's a certain number of days. And that the word is demonstrating that there are 12 months in a year, 30 days in a month, a 360-day year. It's going to take 7 years for it to move up into another month to get earlier and earlier. So it makes sense, actually, that we're ending up a little bit earlier on the calendar. But see, in 2022, we had Pentecost landing in the middle of what would correlate to May. But this year, we ended up observing on May 7th. Well, that's because we were counting down from the Sabbath after Passover. So probably what we need to be doing is counting down from when the barley is first being picked, because that's what the word says. It doesn't say countdown after Passover. I love that. I love that God broke that open, because that was a counterfeit teaching from Reformed Judaism, and from, Catholicism has had a huge impact on Reformed Judaism. I mean, whoever's oppressing you for years and years and forcing you to live in ghettos and stripping you of your culture and your religion and everything else is going to have an influence and an impact on what's going on. And unfortunately, the harlot and the prostitutes that bore out of her, you can see right now, joined with that. They are all of the Antichrist. They deny Christ. I don't care if they say that they believe in him. They deny Christ. They do not follow what he said. That is a denial of Christ. Okay. Thank you for listening. And please let me know, is this clear? And let's continue to discern this. Let's keep praying about it so that when we come together, we can have a conversation about this, and God can be glorified through each one of us. Each one of us needs to go and discern this with God and ask him, is this true? Is this the way that you want us to be observing? Is this right? Thank you for listening.